Alrighty, folks, it is time at long last for the 5th annual Revolution World Championships. This is a 16-player invitation only double elimination tournament, so no Swiss rounds, no cutting to top cut. We are just playing until we are dealt 2 losses and hoping that everyone else gets 2 losses first. It's going to be a pretty interesting, pretty tough field to fight through. Certainly the Solitaire meta feels solved in some ways, and in other ways I feel like there's still a lot that's pretty wide open. And certainly the deck that we are bringing with us this time around is not one I have seen a ton of experimentation with this month, and I do think I have cracked the code on how to best make it work. So, before we dive into everything, as always, links are in the description below to all of the key resources for all things Revolution Custom Standard. If you want to check out the format for yourself, everything down in the description will help you get kickstarted into the format. Most importantly, that Custom Magic Discord server where you can join the community, play the format for yourself, and check out all of the other fun projects that people in the community are working on. One additional link that's not normally down there, in place of the link to the GP tournament bracket that would normally be there for a Grand Prix month. There is not only the Worlds tournament bracket, but also a link to the full deck lists review stream. Instead of a normal deck lists review for each matchup as we go into the matchups, because of how much this is going to really take full concentration and focus. I am not going to be doing deck list matchup discussion too much prior to the match beginning. So you're going to want to check out that deck list review to get a beat on everything that everybody's playing. But we will go into what we're up to this month at a bare minimum. So obviously, let's get into that. Now, we qualified for this Grand Prix back in May with a red-green aggro deck, so it only seems fitting that we try and make a bid for the world's crown with another red-green deck, though we are nowhere near as aggressive as we were back in May. This is red-green Wish Ramp. I have been trying to rack my brain on how to crack open red-green ramp for a hot minute now, and I think I might have finally gotten there courtesy of 2 very strong toolbox cards that lend a ton of flexibility to an already pretty solid strategy. Now, the namesake toolbox card is Last Wish. It is 4 red and a green for a sorcery that lets us play a card from our sideboard and untaps up to 5 lands, though we cannot play a card named Last Wish outside of the out of the sideboard. Which is fine. We don't have any Last Wishes in the sideboard. We're usually not going to be boarding it out, so that's all well and good. So we have 9 1-ofs in the sideboard, plus 2 different 3-ofs in the sideboard that are perfectly reasonable to reach for with a Last Wish in game 1 if need be. So tons of flexibility there, tons of versatility. Can find value engines, finishers, interaction. It's going to give us a lot of room to really work with whatever our opponent presents to us. The other toolbox card is one that has seen more experimentation this season, which is Venture Capitalist. Recently buffed as of November last year in the Cliques of Nyland buff patch, Venture Capitalist is 1 in a red for a 2/1 human noble that allows you to search your library for an artifact and exile it when it enters, allowing you to play that card for the turn. You can also tap and sacrifice an artifact to add 1 mana of any color. So it's a pseudo mana dork, but really it is here to tutor up artifacts. Now we have 11 dedicated artifacts, but beyond that we do have a 12th in the mana base. So we get some flexibility and versatility through artifacts by having Venture Capitalists find us artifacts we might need. We have access to Last Wish to get us utility from the sideboard, and then the rest of our main deck is just good, strong ramp spells. So that ramp starts at 1 mana with, of course, Husk Forger Acolyte. Been a hot minute since we played this, but if we're going to be playing a ramp plan, I feel like Husk Forger is very necessary for this kind of strategy because it just gets the ball rolling so early. There are so many good 2 and 3 mana options that you want to do to really start jumping ahead of the opponent earlier on in the game, and Husk Forger really enables that quite well, even though it limits us to generating colorless mana on this. That is not something I am willing to cave and try and put the coalesced lands from Cyberos in to try and fix that colorless mana. I am content with it just being colorless mana. I think one of the biggest bottlenecks for us is going to be making sure we do not let our opponent chip our life total too low. We do not have a lot of ways to sustain ourselves based on our life total, so we have to be very conscientious of that going through this World's run. So no coalesced lands. Husk Forger just makes colorless, but it can help us get some of our more proactive, explosive plays going ahead of schedule. And later on in the game, as we're generating a bunch of mana, if we are running out of things to do with it, we can just convert this into a 5/5 with trample that can very meaningfully clock the opponent in a pinch. The other 1 mana option we have available to us is Root Fossil. We are on 3 copies of this 1 mana artifact. We can pay 2, sacrifice it, surveil 3, put a land surveilled this way from our graveyard into play tapped. We can surface it for 2 and a green if there are 6 other cards in our graveyard as a 2/4 plant with that surveil 3 and ramp a land surveilled this way onto the battlefield as an attack trigger. Gives us a bit of graveyard value later on in the game. We can kind of gum up the board a little bit if we need to. It's a reasonable blocker. It's a reasonable, value piece. But it just gives us a bit more ramp, a bit more ways of jumping ahead of the opponent. We do have some things that care about us putting stuff in our graveyard, so that can be very nice as well. And this can also just be a really nice follow, either like a really nice turn 1 play into cracking it on turn 2, or it can be a really nice follow-up to a turn 1 Husk Forger where it allows us to cast Root Fossil and crack it turn 2 to really start tearing ahead of the opponent. Jumping up to 2 mana, we have the Venture Capitalist, of course, as well as Ring of Promised Vows, 1 and a green artifact that taps for a green, and if the mana is spent to cast our 2nd spell in a turn, that spell can't be countered. This is one of 3 cards I have in the deck specifically to try and pressure out control decks in the field. I do think control is going to be a very real presence in the format here. We just have strong, uncounterable counter spells, so I think the only 2 ways you can really comfortably pierce the unconditional counter ability of Draconis Magistus and Silent Lakefront is to either run an ample amount of hand attack, which requires you to be very deep in black, or for you to just run things that are uncounterable themselves. And Ring of Promised Vows lets us make pretty much anything in our deck uncounterable, which is going to be really good to help us puncture any board stalls the opponent might try to set up in control matchups. Also just helps us get ahead of mana. It's a really reasonable turn 2 play. Because we can tap it immediately, we could tap this on turn 2 into a Husk Forger if we didn't have the Husk Forger on turn 1. It, is just kind of solid enough. And the green mana production is actually pretty relevant. We do have a quad green pipped spell in our deck. So having access to that additional green mana is certainly nice as well. We do also have a pair of utility artifacts at 2 mana here. We have Golden Bloom of the Silenced, which is sort of the catch-all, shut-off-the-key piece in question tool. If there is one particular card that the opponent could use to just absolutely tear ahead of us, we can find this with Venture Capitalist, and then 4 mana gets us a Golden Bloom of the Silence that just shuts off any most problematic thing that the opponent could have in that given situation. Similarly, but on a different vector, Astral Displacer, aimed less at the permanents on board and more at the cards in the opponent's hand. We can name a key instant or sorcery, or otherwise a key spell that the opponent might be looking to cast, and then Astral Displacer is going to force that spell to cost at least 7 mana to cast. So Astral Displacer can help us a ton with taxing out the opponent's most important resources. We could name Stargazing and just really lock our opponent to the resources they have in hand. We could name a key counterspell or removal spell to just help get things through, or help keep our board stable. Really depends on the matchup, but this has a lot of flexibility to the point where I felt like with Venture Capitalist present, it was worth having this in the main deck rather than the sideboard. And I will say, as we talk about Golden Bloom of the Silenced and Astral Displacer, I'll talk about the sideboard more once we finish up talking about the main deck, but one of my theories with constructing the main and the sideboard here was I do not want stuff sitting in the sideboard to be exclusively things I find with Venture Capitalist in games 2 and 3. If I do not see myself reasonably wanting to grab it off of Last Wish at any given moment, I do not want it in my sideboard. That helped me really hone in on what gets to be in the sideboard versus what gets either moved to the main or cut from the list altogether. And I think it has helped me a lot with finding the right balance across what cards I run and what quantities I run of them. So that is it for our 2 mana spells. At 3 mana, we have a pair of Atomic Cores. These are going to help us get some more mana as well. We can tap these, put charge counters on them to generate mana later on. We can tap it for mana equal to the number of charge counters on it on later turns, or we can tap and sacrifice it to destroy all non-land permanents with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on it. This gives us a lot of meaningful interaction against things like token decks. Atomic Core just shuts off token decks immediately, unquestionably, which is very nice. We can just wipe the board of all tokens the moment we play it, or we can just hold it up to threaten wiping the board of all tokens. This can pick off a couple troublesome 1s or 2s. This could pick off some 3 mana permanents. Certainly one of the biggest challenges is I want to be able to interact with things like planeswalkers and battles and enchantments and artifacts, but the best options to do so in red and green are things that kind of falter on interacting with other key things. Namely, there's the 3 mana battle that destroys a non-creature, non-land permanent, but it ignores anything that the opponent might be doing to actively progress their board state and pressure us. So rather than going for something that targets specific types, Atomic Core felt like the right call to try and pressure mana values instead. Especially because I feel like either we're going to be running into control decks where this does have real text against things like Offset Daemon blowing up the subroutine tokens, or has meaningful text against all of the aggro decks that are just trying to keep their curve super low, and this can just completely sweep up the things they have developed in play. Otherwise, at 3 mana, we have 3 copies of Crumbling Tower. This is one of our key value generation tools. 2 and a red enchantment with a landfall trigger to exile top card of our library. We can play that card until the end of our next turn, and we can pay 1 and a red and sacrifice Crumbling Tower to deal damage equal to the number of cards exiled with it to target player. Crumbling Tower is absolutely stellar, and as we start piling up land drops with Root Fossil and some of our other ways to just hit extra land drops, or fetch lands can get us extra landfall triggers, Crumbling Tower can absolutely spiral out of control and is a very real way for us to not only bury the opponent in card advantage, but also kill the opponent over time. I would like to say here and now that because of how awkward it is to track when we have cards available to play, this is partly saying for opponents clarification here and now before we jump into the games, because I am sure anyone watching this that is in the tournament may well be someone who's watching this trying to get a beat on what I'm up to. If I have a card that was exiled by Crumbling Tower this turn, on my turn, sorcery speed and all, I will just have it attached to the Crumbling Tower. If my next end step is the last moment I can play the card, I will mark it toggle to prevent it from untapping, and then once I have passed the opportunity of using it, I will turn it sideways so that way it is clear that it is no longer accessible, and the toggle untap will still be there, so it will not be able to untap and obscure that information any further. That allows me to keep it clear what cards are exiled under which Crumbling Tower, rather than just kind of dragging stuff off to the exile and marking it with a number. That gets kind of tedious over time, so I'm going to be doing it that way to track cards under Crumbling Tower. Our other 3-drop here is Estrathian Gentrifiers as a 3 of 1 red and a green for a human artificer with power equal to the different number of differently named lands we control. We have a lot of differently named lands, a lot of utility lands, because when this enters our attacks, we can also sacrifice a basic land to search up any land, put it into play, and shuffle. If the land comes in untapped, we get it untapped. If it comes in tapped normally, then obviously Gentrifiers isn't going to fix that. But this allows us to just sort of find more of our mana sources. We can convert basics into dual lands. We can find the odd utility land. There's not a ton of utility here in the mana base, but we do have some pretty nice lands to fish up with an Estrathian Gentrifiers in a pinch. So this could be very nice for finding those. Also nice for funneling lands into our graveyard. Again, we will get to that in a moment. With Astrathian Gentrifiers and the number of unique land names here, we should also talk about the one artifact we glossed over outside of our mana base, which is Stella's Journal. This is triple X for a legendary artifact that costs 1 less for each differently named land we control. So if we have 3 different lands on turn 3, we could cast this for X's 2, spending all of our mana, but we're probably going to wait a little while to actually get this into play. It enters with X page counters on it, and at our end step, if we have fewer cards in our hand than the number of page counters on Stella's Journal, we draw equal to the difference. One of the issues that Ramp definitely has is that it is very prone to just sort of vomiting its hand into the table and then just crossing your fingers that is all you need to go the distance. Stella's Journal and Crumbling Tower both really help to mitigate that problem and keep the fuel rolling so we can just kind of bury the opponent before they can stop us. Steamrolling is the name of the game. So Stella's Journal helps round out the value plan alongside Crumbling Tower, and of course with the 3 copies of Venture Capitalist in the main, we can find that Stella's Journal when we need to if it is not in our hand already. Outside of all of that, we have some top-end stuff. Nothing at 4, just some 5s and 6s. Really, the only 5 actually is Aurora Buffer Exec, the reason we care about lands going to our graveyard at all. 1 and quad green for a 5/5 legendary human druid with Trample. Whenever she enters or attacks, we surveil 3, then return all land cards from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This can give us a ton of landfall triggers with Crumbling Tower. This can just get us a ton of mana into play for future turns. We can get a bit of deck selection by, just binning things we don't care about off the top of our deck to try and dig for something more meaningful. Just all around a really strong utility tool here to just help us both, get a reasonable threat in play. 5/5 Trample is not nothing, as evidenced by Huskforger Acolyte's ability being very sound in its own right. But also the ramp just really significantly helps us launch ahead of the opponent, especially if we can get this in early. In Goldfishing, I have found that it is not impossible for me to stick this on turn 3. So certainly Aurora is a pretty appealing utility option here. Otherwise, at 6 mana, we have the 3 copies of Last Wish, of course, and we'll get to the sideboard suite that this accompanies in a little bit. But we also have 2 different 6 mana legendary creatures. We have 2 copies each of Hoenn Champion, a 4 red and green 1/1 legendary human ranger. When she enters, we create 2 different tokens, a 3/3 white and black bird with flying, vigilance, and haste, and a 2/4 red bird warrior with double strike, vigilance, and haste. And she limits combat to no more than 2 attackers and 2 blockers each combat. The nice thing about Hoenn Champion here is that because her threats are divided across multiple bodies, she is really good into more removal-centric matchups. Certainly there are control decks that can just counter this on the stack, but if we can cast this off of a Ring of Promised Vows, Control's going to struggle to meaningfully clean this up without a board wipe. They're going to have to kind of lean on a board wipe to clean this up, but the problem with board wipes is that we can also just present individual threats outside of Hoenn Champion. So this can really divide the pressure that the opponent has to worry about. Both of these tokens are also just really sound for closing out the game in their own right. It is 7 damage turn after turn just by itself, so lots of power to be had here. Our other 6-drop is our next uncounterable spell, End of Mutations. Very recently buffed at the start of March. 3 triple red for a 5/5 legendary alien mutant that can't be countered, has first strike and haste, and whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, if they haven't attacked this turn, it deals 5 damage to them. So this is going to be how we especially try to punish opposing control decks, greedier decks, slower decks. The less they're contributing to the board, or the slower they are at contributing to the board, the more End of Mutations can just really bully them. Worst case scenario, this thing dies and gets to deal 5 damage to them at when they remove it at instant speed. Best case scenario, this thing just causes a massive headache for the opponent, where they are kind of forced to just sacrifice creatures they're attacking in order to not take damage in any spells that they cast. So this can absolutely solo some matchups if we can stick it in play. It is definitely a very valuable piece in that regard. There is one other outlier besides Stella's Journal here, and it's our last uncounterable spell. 3 copies in the main of Terminal Impact. This has absolutely been one of the hallmarks of this format this season. X and a red sorcery, can't be countered, deals damage equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it to any target. If at least 7 was spent to cast it, you may deal that much damage to each creature and each player instead. We're not going to be using the board wipe mode on this too often unless we are absolutely pressed to need to. But this allows us to line up lethal outs without having to worry about the opponent countering our fireballs. We can just funnel mana into the opponent's face, and the nature of this deck is that it builds up a massive mana advantage over the opponent. So especially if the opponent is leaning on a lot of shock lands, if they're a 3-color deck, we can really punish them and rush out an early terminal impact to deal way more damage than they are ready to take. So that is the spells of our deck, but we do have the land base to talk about as well. We have 8 basic lands here between 6 forests and 2 mountains. A heavy green lean despite the triple red cost of End of Mutations, because green is just really important to get on the early turns. It casts our Huskforger Acolytes. It casts our Ring of Promised Vows. Like, the only early things we could reasonably want red mana for are Venture Capitalist or like maybe Terminal Impact or Crumbling Tower, but both of Impact and Tower are still fine to cast later on. Same is true of Venture Capitalist, so green is definitely the more pressing color to develop early on for those Acolytes, for those rings. Also very important that we get a bunch of green mana because of Aurore's very, very tight casting cost. End of Mutations triple red is hard, but quad green at 1 lower mana value is harder. So we have the 3-to-1 split on basics between forests and mountains to try and prioritize getting the green mana when and where we can. Those basics are backed up by 5 basic fetches. We've got a playset of Primal Fissures and 1 copy of Warpway Rings. Primal Fissure, of course, just a mainstay of the format, and then Warpway Rings is a way for us to go get another land off of Venture Capitalist in a pinch, if that is just the best thing we can do with Venture Capitalist in the moment. Otherwise, we have some dual lands. 3 copies of Urban Jungle as some shock lands, 3 copies of Temple of Origins as some more fast lands alongside the Primal Fissures. We have 1 copy of Meandering Path as another fast land and a utility land here that we can cycle away. And if we have to play it in the early turns, it's not necessarily lost, because as far as utility lands go, one of the first things that I looked at squeezing in here was the Nebulas from Solitaire, which have not seen a ton of play to my knowledge. We've got both Sulphurous Nebula and Burgeoning Nebula as one-ofs. Each of these enters tapped, bounces a land to its owner's hand when it enters, one of our own lands, of course, and then taps for 2 mana of their respective colors. Sulphurous adds double red, Burgeoning adds double green. So this not only allows us to rebuy, Meandering Path in a pinch so we can cycle it later on in the game, but also one of the things that the Nebulas are really good with is they allow us to improve how much mana we get back from a Last Wish. Now, with Last Wish untapping 5 lands, functionally what that means is that Last Wish costs us 1 mana overall when we finally get to a point of casting it, assuming it resolves, of course. And so with 1 Nebula in play, Last Wish suddenly becomes mana neutral, and if we have both Nebulas in play, it's actually mana positive. It generates us a mana in addition to letting us play something from our sideboard. So that can be really powerful to just let us do more things, do more damage with Last Wish out of, big burn spell out of the sideboard. Gets us more flexibility with the Last Wish. And also just gets us more mana, gets us more land drops, just all around really solid in a strategy like this where, we have so many lands that can be untapped in the early turns already. There's no harm in running these just on the off chance of getting to do some big explosive turn with Last Wish here, or otherwise just kind of smoothing out our overall number of land drops. Then we have 2 more utility lands here. We have Protean Bows, which is really nice here because the turn that it enters, we can tap it for 1 mana of any color, and then afterwards it produces colorless. So this can cast a turn 1 Huskforger Acolyte. And then this allows us to have a very worst case scenario engine here by just paying for tap, make a colorless Fox Shapeshifter with Changeling. 1/1's not the most meaningful threats in a strategy like this, but if we are pushed into the brink and we just need some way of getting onto the board, Protean Bows can allow us to do so. And again, the colorless mana generation is not the worst thing in the world because it can be mana of any color when it enters. And the unique land type here is valuable enough for Astrathian Gentrifiers and Stella's Journal. And our last utility land here is Buffer Reconservatory. Enters tapped. It is a forest that levels up for triple green. It's a 3/2 with Ward 2 at levels 1 and 2, and it's a 7/6 with Ward 2 at levels 3 and beyond. With Aurora being in the deck, I felt like Buffer Reconservatory was more valuable than the red option. Also, Ward 2 is just much more of a headache for the opponent than First Strike, I think. This can be a much more meaningful threat at the points where we start to get it in play, and it's entirely possible for us to level this up 3 times in one turn, so it goes from just being a land to being a 7/6 that gets to swing in right then and there. The one awkward spot with Buffer Reconservatory is that the ward is really bad into opposing terminal impact, but that is a price we will just have to accept to pay. This is still really good to find off of Astrathian Gentrifiers. This is really good for contributing to Gentrifiers stats and Stella's Journal stats overall, so that is going to be worth the downsides. So that is the main deck of Red-Green Wish Ramp. Our sideboard, we'll talk about the 3-ofs and then talk about the 1-ofs. Our 3-ofs here are Hungry Blob and Millicent Layspire. Hungry Blob here is meant to pick off key artifacts and enchantments that might be allowing the opponent to keep our resources off the board if they are using enchantment-based removal, like Sanctum of Repression. This allows us to interact with opposing value engines if the opponent's on Crumbling Tower, for instance, or if they are playing. Oh, I am blanking on the name of it. The 2-mana blue Anticipate. The blue strategic planning enchantment from Cliques of Nylon that flips into Progress to allow you to copy your spells. This lets us interact with that as well. So Hungry Blob gives us some very needed artifact and enchantment interaction. One of the nice things that we can do with these 3-ofs is we can board in 2 of them and board out 2 cards that we might not want in a particular matchup. So we both have some to draw when we want to draw them, and we still have one in the sideboard for Last Wish if we are finding ourselves needing to do so. Same with Millicent Layspire. This is going to be really good at just mopping up opposing boards if we have to. Unfortunately, this is really good at killing all of our own things as well. But I think that is just a price we have to pay. Millicent Layspire is just one of our best big sweepers right now. Pressuring Planeswalkers is really meaningful as well. So Millicent Layspire is something that we're kind of caving to have to play here. It is castable off of a on-curve Last Wish, which is really nice. So hopefully that can matter in some more aggressive matchups. It is also just a really sizable blocker, so not only does it sweep up the board against aggro, it sets the opponent back on being able to pressure us once they start developing their board again. So that can be very nice as well. Otherwise, for 1-ofs, we have some additional copies of stuff in the main deck. We have another copy of Venture Capitalist. So this allows us to functionally turn Last Wish into any of the artifacts in our main deck if we need to. We can find another copy of Terminal Impact to just kill with the Last Wish. We can find Crumbling Tower to turn Last Wish into more card advantage. We can find End Mutations to kill if we don't quite have a Terminal Impact lethal lined up. We can find the End Mutations and just start pressuring the opponent with this. And then we have some 1-ofs to sort of fill additional niche roles. We have Vasilisa Helping Hand, which can kind of do multiple things here for us. This can allow us to stack up stats on creatures we already have in play, so we could stack up +1/+1 counters on, say, the 2/4 double striking Bird Warrior from Hoenn Champion, or we could start growing Aurora out of range of most blockers. Any Mutations, similarly, Astrathian Gentrifier, start building up those stats is really nice. Can even just make an artifact token for the sake of cracking to Venture Capitalist, I guess. But the more important modes here are that we can use her to gain life in an absolute desperation mode, or, more appealing, we can flip her into a big ol' 6/5 with Hexproof, or a 7/7 with Trample, or a 5/6 with Vigilance Reach and Death Touch, depending on the matchup. The Vigilance Reach and Death Touch is going to be really nice into Dragon matchups. The 6/5 with Hexproof can be really nice against decks that are more inclined to contribute to the board on the ground. And then a 7/7 with trample can just be really nice to pressure the opponent otherwise. And the nice thing about Facilisa is that we can develop her a turn ahead of when we actually want to be like turning her into a creature. Use one of her first 2 loyalty abilities, and then when we transform her, she will not have summoning sickness because she was already in play that turn. So we can just kind of, uptick her, make a potion, flip her the following turn into a 7/7, then just crack the potion, put 2 counters on her, swing 9. We have Stonework Titan, one last artifact in the deck overall. One last artifact that was almost in the main deck. I cut Stonework Titan very last minute. This is another value generation option. We can go find a creature or land with mana value 1 or less, put it into play when it enters. So this finds any of our utility lands, finds a Huskforger Acolyte, and we can pay 1 and a green and bounce a creature or land to its owner's hand to give this indestructible for the turn. So we can pick up our Hoenn Champion, we can pick up Venture Capitalist, pick up Aurora. This allows us to protect things from removal while also making this a very annoying blocker or attacker. And the goal here is really just that this allows us to set up another avenue of value plan, one that contributes to the board more meaningfully than something like Crumbling Tower. Again, this was really close to being in the main deck. I did end up cutting it, but the nice thing about the Venture Capitalist plan is that we could still slot it into the main deck if we think that we might just really want to draw it, and then Venture Capitalist allows us to find it in a pinch. But it ultimately got the cut from the main because Venture Capitalist into Stonework Titan is just 7 mana, which... No, I think most cases, if we're venture capitalisting for Stonework Titan, we're probably in a bit of trouble. So that has wound up relegated to the sideboard, leaving Stella's Journal as the artifact we find if we really just want to get some value rolling. We have Plaguebane Hulk here as another way to check any sort of problem permanent. This is one of the ones that just doesn't deal with creatures, but we can pop opposing battles, planeswalkers, artifacts, enchantments. We can even pop opposing utility lands. We can pop our own lands, pop our basics, pop any sort of land, and then just get it back into play with Aurora, and build up Lotus Springs on our side of the board or the opposing side of the board as a result. Very nice to just sort of have another all-purpose check to certain problems. And this coupled with Hungry Blob does let us cover a lot of bases. And then we have 2 more artifacts that are both aimed at fighting graveyard strategies. We are split with 1 copy each of Faces of the Faceless and Archival Storage. Now, these are ones that we're probably not going to keep into the sideboard long term. Realistically, if we're up against a deck where either of these are good, we're probably going to be boarding them in after game 1. But having these in the sideboard in a Last Wish strategy means that in a pinch, we can Last Wish for these to go find them and get them where they need to be. Archival Storage removes all abilities from cards in graveyards, and we can pay 1 at sorcery speed to put a card from graveyard on bottom of its owner's library. This gives us a very niche out to, running out of cards in our library. But more importantly, it just shuts off a lot of powerful effects. Like it shuts off Flashback, shuts off Surface, so has just a lot of nice utility options. And then Faces of the Faceless helps us shut out reanimation spells, shuts off the Offset Daemon Overflow token, gives us some very sound checks, and can check many of the things that Archival Storage can as well. Splitting between the 2 of these allows us to have a bit more plan of attack, because if the opponent is on one of these graveyard strategies, it is very likely that they will want to lean on Golden Bloom of the Silenced themselves to try and shut out the key graveyard hate piece. So having a split between these 2 allows us to put them in a bind where Golden Bloom cannot stop them completely from getting hit by graveyard hate. So hopefully that can help tie up some loose ends against graveyard matchups. I did think about running the modal artifact that can shut off Sacrifice for non-land permanents as, cost of spells and abilities to target Aristocrats. But the more I found myself looking at Aristocrats, the more I just realized that I think Faces of the Faceless does shore up some of the biggest issues with Aristocrats anyways. And I think I can just beat Aristocrats otherwise, because I think they suffered enough hits to some of their cards where I think they're definitely worse at holding down the board in the early turns. And if we're just kind of launching ahead of the opponent, I think we goldfish faster than they do. So maybe we'll get pushed to put that to the test. Maybe everyone is too paranoid about Graveyard Hate to bring Aristocrats once again, but we'll have to see. And that is red-green Wish Ramp. There are a few notable exceptions, notable outliers, things that were not brought in this deck that I do want to talk about before we wrap things up. A lot of the red-green ramp decks of the last year have been leaning a lot on Warden of Tremors, sometimes with Lightning Warmonger as well. Warmonger getting to come into play on turn 2 with Huskforger Acolyte, taps for triple red, only for creature spells, and then if mana was spent on a creature spell this way, it gives it a haste counter and a decayed counter on top of just getting to cast the creature. And so that can rush out either a very early Hoenn Champion, where having it with a decayed counter doesn't really matter, or a Warden of Tremors, where you don't necessarily need to attack with this to get the most value out of it. It gives you extra land drops, can really dig into your library. But one of the things that was really on my mind was that I felt like the key creature threats in this deck needed to be things that had lasting value, even if they got hit by spot removal. I think spot removal is really good right now, and with that in mind, I just did not want to be left super vulnerable to spot removal hosing one of my big ramp targets. Warden of Tremors certainly does get a lot of value. That landfall trigger does a ton of work, but the issue is those cards only being available for as long as you control Warden of Tremors means that the opponent just has to spend, 2 mana on Fateful Ascent, and then all of the value that we generated off of Warden of Tremors is completely lost. So with that in mind, I really didn't want to risk that. I think between Hoenn Champion sort of splitting stats across multiple bodies, and the mutations punishing the opponent for trying to cast removal spells at instant speed or without creatures in play, and Roar generating us mana and helping fix our top decks are all just a little bit more valuable than something like Warden of Tremors. And the cost reduction mode here just really isn't the most important thing in the universe for us. We're trying to just generate enough mana anyways that it doesn't really matter. The one thing where we really just want to funnel all the mana we could into a spell is Terminal Impact, where the cost reduction actually doesn't help us at all. The other exception here is one that I've seen getting a lot of experimentation over the last 2 seasons, Vow's Reflection. There are some creatures that have been getting some use here and there in ramp that are absent from this strategy, and certainly there are some things in our deck that have very good enter trigger value. We talked about how Stonework Titan can be really good with bouncing some of our creatures to get some value later on, so you might be wondering why Vow's Reflection isn't present with that in mind. It might even be more efficient than something like a Stonework Titan off of Last Wish, because we can cast Vow's Reflection and then still also cast something else. But the reason why we're on Stonework Titan and not Reflection is that Titan allows us to immediately replay the thing on the turn that we use this ability, so that way we do not leave ourselves completely shields down. And we could use this at instant speed to protect either the Titan or something else from removal. Vow's Reflection is much more of a known quantity. The opponent knows when this is going on the stack. It is going on the stack too late for us to be able to redeploy the creature, and the card draw on offer from Vow's Reflection, while very nice, doesn't really help us if we're having to use this to pick up like a Istrathian Gentrifiers or a Huskforger Acolyte or a Venture Capitalist. I do think there are some builds of Vow's Reflection ramp that are better than they might look, but I do not think any of them are better than Last Wish ramp. And so ultimately, I think Vow's Reflection just did not serve this strategy very well for what I was looking to do. And that is the deck. I am incredibly nervous about this month. I think that aggro looks really strong. I think that control looks really strong. There are some combos that people have been cooking that have just been kept to themselves. So there's going to be some very strong decks that nobody sees coming. Certainly, I don't know if anyone's seeing red-green ramp coming. There's one other competitor where I told them that this was something I was looking at trying to refine, but I have not checked in with them in a little bit, so I don't know if they are aware that I have settled on this particular build of this deck. Certainly, I've seen them experimenting with something kind of similar, so we might be on a similar page. But I'm very excited to dive into this tournament. It's going to be one of the toughest tests of my ability to think on the fly, strategize through each individual matchup, big test of my deck building skills, big test of my ability to sort of read what other people are up to and sort of find a way to navigate what everyone else is doing and squeeze on in there. But one of the things that has me most optimistic is that looking back at last year, one of the things that just really, really helped Stasis out in the whole run was Builder of Monuments providing so much flexibility where that toolbox could just go find anything and everything you might want or need. Now, while we're not cheating mana on the things that we're toolboxing for like Builder of Monuments could, we are trying to generate enough mana to make up for having to spend mana on the things that we're finding. So I am pretty optimistic. I think that we might make that pattern established of toolbox decks looking really, really nice into Worlds with such a broad field where you have to be ready for any matchup. We have pretty solid tiebreakers. We don't have the best in the field by any measure, but there are only 3 players who guaranteed get the play against us. And there are a number of players who are stuck getting the draw against us. So between the number of people we get a die roll against and the number of people who we just guaranteed to be on the play against, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about this month overall. We'll have to see if it is unearned confidence or if there really is a method to my madness here. So thank you all for sticking by through this incredibly long deck tech. Obviously a lot to talk about though, so there is a reason for this to be as lengthy as it is. And if you want to watch another lengthy video after this one, of course, be sure to check out that decklist stream. There are 16 players in this tournament. I've spent a little bit of time in that video talking about this deck, but there are 15 others to talk about as well. So tune into that. Check out everything that is going on in this tournament and wish me luck, because I certainly am going to be giving this month my all. Started off this qualifying season with a really good performance. Let's see if I can round it out with a good performance as well. I had a really good run last month too, so maybe that's a sign. We'll have to see. Again, wish me luck. I'm certainly going to be appreciating any luck that is sent my way. And until round 1 begins, I'll see you all in the Revolution chat. Bye-bye.